The blood in Nora's mouth tasted like rusted copper. It was Tuesday. That meant her mother used the heavy wooden spoon. Most people dread the mob knocking on their door, but when the men in tailored suits finally broke the deadbolt, Nora only felt one thing: profound, hollow relief. Nora sat on the cracked linoleum floor, her knees pulled tight to her chest. It was a difficult posture to maintain. Her belly pressed firmly against her thighs, the thick flesh of her waist spilling over the elastic band of her faded sweatpants. She breathed shallowly through her nose to avoid aggravating the split in her lower lip. Above her, Diane paced. The apartment smelled of cheap vodka, stale tobacco, and the overwhelming scent of panic. 50,000, Diane muttered, her voice a ragged scrape. She gnawed on her thumbnail until the cuticle bled. Where the hell am I supposed to get 50,000? They're going to kill me. Nora didn't answer. She knew better than to speak when Diane was cornered. Speaking drew attention, and attention drew violence. Nora had spent her 22 years perfecting the art of becoming furniture. She folded her large frame into corners, wearing oversized, drab colors, attempting to shrink a body that stubbornly refused to be small. Diane stopped abruptly, her bloodshot eyes snapping down to where Nora sat by the baseboards. The fear in the older woman's face instantly curdled into something uglier. Familiar. "It's your fault," Diane spat. Nora kept her eyes fixed on a cigarette burn in the linoleum. "Look at you," Diane said, stepping closer. The toe of her cheap boot nudged Nora's thigh. Not a kick, just a demeaning prod, taking up half the damn room. If I didn't have to feed a cow, maybe I'd have savings. If you were normal, maybe you could get a real job, bring in some real money. But who wants to hire a fat, lazy slob who sweats just walking down the stairs? The words didn't sting anymore. They were just the weather. Nora remained silent. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," Diane shrieked. Nora lifted her head. Her left cheek was already swollen, a dark, purple bruise blooming beneath her eye from an hour ago, right before the phone call that sent Diane into this spiral. Diane raised her hand. Nora didn't flinch. She just blinked, waiting for the impact. It was the lack of reaction that always infuriated Diane the most. The mother swung, a hard, open-palmed slap that cracked loudly in the small, stifling room. Nora's head snapped to the side. Her cheek burned. She tasted fresh blood mingling with the old. "Useless," Diane breathed, her chest heaving. "You are utterly useless." Before Nora could center her head again, a sound stopped the air in the room. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't the frantic pounding of a landlord or the erratic banging of one of Diane's drug connections. It was slow, measured, heavy. The kind of knock that didn't ask for permission to enter, but merely announced that an entrance was imminent. Diane froze. The color drained from her face, leaving her sallow skin looking like old parchment. She stumbled backward, bumping into the thrift store coffee table. "No," she whispered. "It's too early. They said tomorrow. Knock, knock, knock." The wood of the doorframe groaned. Nora pushed herself up from the floor. It was a cumbersome process. She had to plant her hands flat on the linoleum, heave her weight upward, and steady herself on her feet. Her knees popped in the quiet room. By the time she was standing, the deadbolt clicked open. A key. They had a key. The door swung inward, squealing on rusted hinges. 3 men stepped into the cramped living room. The sheer mass of them seemed to suck all the oxygen from the air. The 2 in the back were built like brick walls, wearing dark suits that strained across broad shoulders. But it was the man in the front who dictated the temperature of the room. Gabriel. Nora didn't know his last name, but she knew the whispers on the street. He was the creditor of last resort. He didn't look like a thug. He was tall, lean but solidly built, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than this entire apartment building. His dark hair was combed back, silver dusting his temples, but it was his eyes that caught Nora. They were a pale, flat grey. They swept over the room like a forensic light, taking in the empty bottles, the peeling wallpaper, the grime on the windows, and finally, the two women. Gabriel's gaze landed on Diane, who was visibly shaking now. Then his eyes slid to Nora. He took in her battered face, the fresh blood on her chin, the way she held her right arm tight against her ribs. He looked at her heavy frame, the worn, oversized t-shirt stretched across her chest. He didn't sneer. He didn't look away in disgust like most men did. He just catalogued her, filing the information away. "Diane," Gabriel said. His voice was a low, smooth baritone. It didn't need volume to carry authority. "You missed a phone call." "Gabriel, please," Diane choked out, her hands fluttering in front of her like injured birds. "I have it. I'm getting it. I just need—" "You need time," Gabriel finished for her, stepping fully into the room. His Italian leather shoes crunched softly on the grit covering the floor. "Everyone needs time. Unfortunately, time is a commodity you ran out of yesterday." 50,000, Diane, plus vigorish. "Where is it?" "I had a bad run," she sobbed, backing against the kitchen counter. "The tables were rigged, I swear to God. Just give me a week." Gabriel sighed softly. He reached into his inside jacket pocket. Diane whimpered, throwing her hands over her face. But Gabriel only pulled out a silver cigarette case. He snapped it open, extracted a cigarette, and one of the behemoths behind him instantly produced a lighter. Gabriel took a slow drag. "I don't run a charity. I run a business. You consumed my capital. I require it back. Today." "I don't have it," Diane screamed, sliding down the cabinets until she hit the floor. "I have nothing. You can kill me, but you won't get a dime." Gabriel looked down at her through a veil of grey smoke. He looked immensely bored. He hated squalor, and he hated theatrics even more. He turned his head slightly, signaling the two men behind him. They began to step forward. Diane panicked. Her eyes darted around the room wildly, looking for anything of value. There was the pawn shop TV, a microwave. Trash. Then her eyes landed on Nora. "Wait!" Diane shrieked, scrambling to her knees. She pointed a trembling, bruised finger across the room. "Take her!" The room went dead silent. Even the two enforcers stopped in their tracks, glancing at their boss. Gabriel didn't move. He kept his cigarette poised near his mouth, his grey eyes shifting slowly from the groveling woman on the floor to the large girl standing quietly by the wall. "Excuse me?" Gabriel asked. The temperature in his voice dropped 10 degrees. "Nora," Diane babbled, sensing a non-existent lifeline. "My daughter. Take her. She's strong. She can work. She eats enough for a whole crew, God knows, but you can put her to work. Clean your houses, wash your floors, sell her. Do whatever you want. Erase my debt. Please." Nora stared at her mother. A dull, heavy ache bloomed in her chest, settling right beneath her sternum. It wasn't shock. She wasn't surprised that Diane would trade her for a gambling debt. The ache was just the final, pathetic realization that she was worth absolutely nothing to the woman who gave birth to her. Less than nothing. A literal bartering chip to save her own skin. Nora swallowed hard. She didn't cry. She forced herself to look at Gabriel. He was already looking at her. He didn't look amused. He looked at Nora with a strange, clinical intensity. He analyzed the fresh slap mark on her cheek, contrasting with the dark, older bruise. He looked at the way she held herself, not cowering, not begging, just standing there, utterly defeated but entirely present. She was heavy, awkward, bruised, and wearing rags. Gabriel took another drag of his cigarette. He exhaled the smoke slowly toward the cracked ceiling. "A human being," Gabriel said softly, turning back to Diane, "is not legal tender, Diane. Nor do I deal in flesh." "She's a hard worker," Diane pleaded, crawling a few inches forward. "She doesn't talk much. She'll do whatever you say. Just take the fat bitch and leave me alone." One of the men behind Gabriel shifted, an uncomfortable grimace crossing his thick features. Even hardened thugs had mothers. Nora's hands curled into loose fists at her sides. She dug her fingernails into her palms to ground herself. "Just let them kill her," a dark, cynical voice whispered in her head. "Let them shoot her right here on the linoleum, and then let them shoot you. It would be quiet, at least." Gabriel flicked his cigarette ash onto the floor. He stepped closer to Nora. Nora had to tilt her head up to meet his gaze. He smelled of expensive cologne, tobacco, and clean laundry. It was an alien scent in this apartment. "What is your name?" he asked her. He didn't speak to her like she was a child or a dog. He spoke to her like a person. "Nora," she said. Her voice was raspy from disuse. "Did you do that to your face, Nora?" Gabriel asked, nodding slightly toward the bruise. Nora hesitated. In her world, you didn't snitch. But what did it matter now? She nodded once. Gabriel's jaw tightened infinitesimally. He turned his back on her, looking down at Diane. "Your debt is $50,000, Gabriel said. "This girl is not worth $50,000. Diane sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "However," Gabriel continued, his voice echoing coldly off the bare walls, "I find your presence deeply offensive to my sensibilities. I will take the girl. She will work off the interest of your debt in my kitchens. You still owe me the principal. You have 30 days to find the 50 grand, or my associates will return, and they won't bother knocking." Diane looked up, snot and tears smearing her face. Yes, thank you. Take her. Get your things, Nora. Go." Nora didn't move. She couldn't feel her legs. She was being repossessed. Gabriel looked at her over his shoulder. "Do you have belongings you wish to take?" Nora looked around the apartment. A garbage bag full of clothes that barely fit. A battered paperback book. That was it. She looked back at Gabriel and shook her head. "No, then let's go." Gabriel walked past her, heading out the door without a backward glance. His men flanked the exit, waiting. Nora took a step. Her heavy thighs rubbed together. Her cheap sneakers squeaked on the floor. She walked past her mother, who was still kneeling by the cabinets, weeping in relief. Diane didn't look up. She didn't say goodbye. Nora walked out into the narrow, dimly lit hallway. The air outside the apartment building was biting cold. It was late November, and the wind off the river cut right through Nora's thin t-shirt. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering violently. A sleek black SUV idled at the curb. Gabriel was already inside, seated in the back. One of the large men opened the rear door for her. Nora hesitated. She looked at the pristine, cream-colored leather interior. Then she looked down at her dirty sweatpants and battered shoes. She was going to ruin his car. "Get in, Nora!" Gabriel's voice called out from the shadows of the back seat. It wasn't a request. Nora awkwardly climbed in. She had to contort her large body to fit through the door without bumping the frame, apologizing under her breath to the man holding the door. She settled into the seat. It was impossibly soft. It smelled like wealth. The door slammed shut, sealing them inside a quiet, climate-controlled bubble. The street noise vanished. Gabriel didn't look at her. He was typing on a smartphone. The driver put the car in gear, and they pulled away from the curb. Nora watched her apartment building recede in the tinted window. She didn't feel a single ounce of sadness. She sat stiffly on the edge of the seat, trying to take up as little space as possible. She kept her arms pulled tight, trying to minimize her width. She felt gigantic, grotesque, next to this immaculately dressed, powerful man. A few minutes passed in heavy silence. The heater in the SUV was blowing warm air over her freezing skin. "You can relax," Gabriel said abruptly, not looking up from his phone. "The seat is designed to hold weight. You aren't going to break it." Nora's cheeks burned hot. She wanted the floorboards to open and swallow her. He had noticed. Of course he noticed. She was a mountain of flesh in a high-end luxury vehicle. "Sorry," she mumbled, staring at her hands resting on her thick thighs. Gabriel locked his phone and put it in his pocket. He turned his head to look at her. His gaze wasn't predatory, but it was uncomfortably direct. "Do not apologize for existing, Nora," he said flatly. "It is a tedious habit." Nora swallowed. "Where are you taking me?" "To my estate," Gabriel answered, looking back out the window at the passing city lights. "You will be bathed, fed, and evaluated. If you can cook or clean, you will do so. If you cannot, we will find something else for you to do." "I can work," Nora said quickly. "I work hard." "I am sure you do," Gabriel replied. The cynicism in his voice was thick. "People who survive environments like the one I just pulled you from usually do. Survival is a full-time job." Nora didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever summarized her life so accurately, so coldly. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the window. The bruised, fat girl staring back looked terrified. But as the SUV sped away from the slums and toward the gated compounds of the elite, Nora felt a tiny, microscopic fracture in the ice that had encased her heart for 20 years. She didn't know if Gabriel was a monster. He probably was. He was a mob boss, a loan shark, a man who bought human beings for debt. But as she watched him silently hand her a clean, pressed handkerchief to wipe the drying blood from her chin, she realized one terrifying truth. He had just shown her more kindness in 10 minutes than her mother had in a lifetime. The estate was not a castle. It was a fortress of glass, steel, and pale stone hidden behind high concrete walls in the northern suburbs. Security cameras blinked silently from the eaves. Men in dark clothing patrolled the perimeter with dogs. Nora was led to a room on the ground floor, near the staff quarters. It was larger than her entire apartment back in the city. A heavy oak bed sat against one wall, draped in thick, neutral-colored linens. There was a private bathroom. There was soap that smelled like cedar. A stern, older woman named Beatrice met her there. Beatrice didn't smile, but she didn't scowl either. She simply handed Nora a stack of neatly folded clothes, heavy cotton aprons, dark trousers with wide, forgiving elastic bands, and soft, oversized shirts. "Shower," Beatrice instructed, her voice brisk. "Throw the rags you are wearing in the incinerator chute. Dinner prep starts at 4. Do you know how to hold a knife?" "Yes," Nora said. "Good, don't be late." That was her welcome. It was transactional, devoid of warmth, and utterly perfect. Nora stepped into the shower and let the scalding water beat down on her bruised shoulders. She washed away the grime of the city, the stale smell of her mother's cigarettes, the dried blood on her chin. When she put on the new clothes, she braced herself for the familiar pinch of fabric cutting into her waist, the tight pull across her chest. They fit perfectly. They had been bought for her size. She stared at herself in the bathroom mirror. The bruise on her cheek was an ugly yellow-purple canvas, but beneath it, her skin was clean. She looked heavy. She looked exhausted. But for the first time in her life, she didn't look like a mistake. The estate's kitchen was a vast, industrial expanse of stainless steel and black marble. Nora retreated to a corner prep station. She didn't speak. She just worked. She peeled 50 pounds of potatoes. She chopped onions until her eyes burned dry. She butchered chickens with a heavy cleaver, her thick, strong arms making easy work of the bone and cartilage. Physical labor was her armor. Her size, always a liability in the narrow confines of normal society, was an asset here. She could lift the massive cast-iron stock pots. She could stand on the hard tile for 6 hours without complaining. Gabriel rarely entered the kitchen. When he did, the temperature of the room shifted. Staff straightened their spines. Conversations died. It was day 14 when he finally spoke to her. It was past midnight. The staff had retired. Nora was wiping down the massive butcher block, the scent of bleach harsh in her nose. She preferred the quiet of the night shift. It was easier to breathe when she was alone. The swing door pushed open. Gabriel walked in. He had discarded his suit jacket, wearing only a tailored white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He carried a crystal glass with a finger of amber liquid at the bottom. Nora froze, the rag motionless on the wood. She immediately cast her eyes to the floor, shrinking her shoulders. Gabriel walked to the center island. He set his glass down. "You missed a spot," he said. Nora blinked, looking up. He was pointing to a faint stain of beet juice near the edge of her block. She quickly scrubbed it away. "You work relentlessly," Gabriel noted. He leaned against the marble counter, watching her. "Beatrice says you do the work of 3 men. She also says you haven't spoken a single word in 2 weeks unless directly asked a question." Nora kept her head down. "I'm here to pay off a debt, sir, not to socialize." "Look at me, Nora." She forced her head up. Her eyes met his pale grey ones. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked. Nora considered lying, but the truth was heavier. "No." Gabriel tilted his head slightly. "Why not? You know what I am. You know what I do to people who owe me money. You bought me clothes that fit," Nora said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "You gave me a bed. You let me eat the food I cook. My mother would have sold me for a bottle of gin, and you bought me for $50,000. You're a criminal, sir. But you're the first person who treated me like a human being." Gabriel stared at her. The silence stretched tight between them. For a brief second, the cold, calculating mask slipped, revealing something intensely weary underneath. "I didn't buy you," Gabriel said softly. "I removed you. There is a difference. Your debt is not $50,000. Your mother's debt is $50,000. You owe me nothing." Nora gripped the edge of the butcher block. Her knuckles turned white. "Then why am I here?" "Because," Gabriel said, taking a sip of his drink, "you are useful, and I do not tolerate waste. Your mother wasted you. I will not." He turned and walked toward the door. Just before he pushed it open, he stopped. "Stop shrinking, Nora. You are a large woman. Own the space you occupy. Apologizing for your gravity only invites people to try and move you." The door swung shut. Nora stood alone in the kitchen, her chest rising and falling heavily. She looked at her reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator. She squared her shoulders. She stood up straight. She took up space. On day 31, the bubble burst. Nora was kneading bread dough when Beatrice walked in, her face drawn tight. "Wash your hands. The boss wants you in the front office." Nora wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron. Her heart hammered a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She knew what day it was. She walked through the opulent corridors of the main house. Her soft-soled shoes made no sound on the imported rugs. When she reached the heavy mahogany doors of Gabriel's office, she didn't knock. The door was already ajar. Inside, Gabriel sat behind a massive desk. 2 of his men stood by the walls, and in the center of the room, kneeling on the Persian rug, was Diane. She looked worse than before. Her clothes were filthy, her hair matted. She was shaking violently, muttering to herself. When she heard Nora enter, her head snapped up. "Nora!" Diane screamed, lunging forward. The 2 men instantly stepped in, kicking her hard in the ribs. Diane collapsed, coughing and wheezing. Nora stopped just inside the door. She didn't flinch. She felt entirely detached, as if she were watching a film from a great distance. Gabriel held up a hand. The men stepped back. 30 days, Gabriel said, looking down at Diane. You failed to produce the capital. You attempted to board a bus to Ohio. My men found you behind a diner. Please, Diane choked out, spitting blood onto the rug. Gabriel, I tried. The money is gone. I owe bad people. Bad people. You owe me, Gabriel corrected smoothly. He shifted his gaze to Nora. Nora. Come here. Nora walked forward. She didn't look at her mother. She stood beside Gabriel's desk, standing tall, just as he had told her to do. She is your mother, Gabriel said quietly, addressing Nora. I am a businessman. The debt must be settled, but I will allow you to make the choice. Do I hand her over to the men she owes in the city, who will undoubtedly kill her? Or do I settle this my way? Diane crawled toward Nora, grabbing the hem of her heavy trousers. Tell him you'll work. You can work it off. Please, Nora, you owe me. I gave you life. You fat, ungrateful bitch. Save me. Nora looked down at the woman. She looked at the grasping hands. She remembered the heavy wooden spoon. She remembered the sneers, the starvation diets, followed by mocking laughter when she ate the scraps. She remembered the deep, crushing weight of being hated by the only person who was supposed to love her. Nora reached down and methodically peeled her mother's fingers off her pants. I don't owe you anything, Nora said. Her voice was flat, empty. Diane stared up at her, genuine shock replacing the panic. What? I don't owe you anything, Nora repeated. She looked at Gabriel. Do what you have to do. Her ledger is not my problem. Gabriel's expression remained impassive, but a dark glint of respect flickered in his grey eyes. He nodded at his men. They hauled Diane to her feet. She began to scream, thrashing wildly, cursing Nora's name, calling her every vile word she could summon. The heavy oak doors closed, cutting off the sound entirely. The office was silent. The only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Nora stood there. She waited for the guilt to hit her. She waited to feel the crushing weight of being a bad daughter. But nothing came. Only a profound, vast emptiness that felt remarkably like freedom. Gabriel stood up from his desk. He walked around to the front, leaning against the polished wood. He looked at Nora, taking in her flour-dusted apron, her steady breathing. Are you going to cry? He asked. No, Nora said. Good. Gabriel reached into his pocket and pulled out his silver cigarette case. He didn't open it. He just turned it over in his hands. Your mother will not be killed. She will be put on a boat. She will work off her debt in a fish processing plant in international waters. It will take her approximately 20 years. She will never return to this city. Nora exhaled a breath she didn't know she was holding. As for you, Gabriel continued, his voice dropping lower, the kitchen suits you, but you are wasted merely peeling potatoes. Tomorrow, my head chef will begin training you on the line. You have a palate. Use it. Nora looked at him. Really looked at him. He wasn't a hero. He was a ruthless man who balanced ledgers with human lives. But he had looked at the ruined, heavy thing that her mother had discarded, and he had seen a foundation. Why are you doing this? Nora asked. Gabriel looked up, his pale eyes locking onto hers. He stepped closer. He reached out, his hand hovering for a fraction of a second before his knuckles gently brushed against the fading yellow bruise on her cheek. Because, Gabriel said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room, the world breaks everyone, Nora, but some of us are strong enough to forge the pieces into something sharp. You are sharp. I like sharp things. He pulled his hand back. Dinner is at 8, he said, turning back to his desk. I expect the roast to be perfect. Nora turned toward the door. She pushed it open. She walked down the hallway, her steps heavy, solid, and completely grounded. She was fat. She was scarred. She was entirely alone in the world, and for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she wanted to be. Did Nora's story of surviving the unimaginable and finding her own dark strength move you? Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones fought behind closed doors, and the most unexpected saviors are the ones walking in the shadows. If you loved this grounded, emotional Mafia drama, hit that like button right now. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder to take up space and own their worth.